Good afternoon. It is straight up noon, and this is another episode of Bridges Conversations. My name is Steve Givens. I am the executive director of the Bridges Foundation in St. Louis. We provide the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius Loyola in everyday life as a 9-month, what's known as 19th annotation retreat. And this little Facebook Live series is a series of conversations with people in our community, people who have been through the exercises, people who help us give the exercises, all kinds of different people. And today we are joined by Sharon Tan. Sharon was a retreatant just a couple of years ago. She is a Protestant theologian. She's a lawyer. She's been an academic dean in a seminary. And she's been in St. Louis for a few years now, has become very active with Bridges, especially helping us reach out to Protestants who want to learn more about this way of praying. So welcome, Sharon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, why don't you tell us a little more about yourself and how you came to know about and experience the spiritual exercises through Bridges.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm an immigrant. I was born and I grew up in Malaysia, and I came to the U.S. to go to college. After college, becoming a lawyer, and then going back to grad school, and becoming a professor of ethics or moral theology, and then for a few years, and then becoming a dean in Minnesota and coming here now to St. Louis on an interim contract. And I met Sinsin, and she told me about Bridges. I'd never heard of the spiritual exercises before. I'd heard of the Jesuits, but didn't know very much about them. So I asked a couple of friends, what about this? And one of them was a ex-Catholic, Protestant now, but ex-Catholic, and she told me that Jesuits are good guys. They have a pretty good reputation for social justice education, and they're not too weird. So I thought I could try that. And the other one actually said, "There's not this many places that you get a chance like this to do a retreat in daily life, so jump on it." So I did, and here I am.
Yeah, nice. What surprised you about the retreat, or what did you maybe discover? And before you answer that question, we have a few viewers out there, so I wanted to welcome them. I can't see who you are right now, but if you have any questions that you want to ask Sharon or me later in the episode, please leave a comment on Facebook, and we'll get to them when we can. So Sharon, what surprised you, or what did you discover about yourself by taking these exercises?
Well, I grew up in prayer meetings that were long and boring, and mostly prayer. There were two kinds of prayer meetings. Ones that were boring, and mostly consisted of, how can you persuade God to do something for you? And the other kind of prayer meetings that we got into later were charismatic. I have a charismatic influence in my past, and then they were not as boring, but they were quite different, and I don't need to. So I didn't know really how to pray, because I didn't know that, and I thought, oh my gosh, 1 hour of prayer, how am I going to go through that time? So the biggest surprise, I suppose, for me came fairly early on, which is that prayer was fun. Prayer is fun. It's interesting. It's fun. It's amazingly rewarding. It's and that was not something that I had expected. I thought I was going to be doing an exercise in holiness. and I found out that it's fun.
Exercise sounds like a lot of work, and it sounds like a lot of discipline. But but you were able to find some fun in that too. So what are one or two of your kind of takeaways from the retreat, and especially as a Protestant theologian who maybe, as you said, comes at this a little bit differently? A year, 2 years later now, what are you finding you discovered?
Well, my relationship with God has so changed. God is through Jesus is someone I can talk to. Call it hermeneutic on life. I look at life through the lens of love instead of fear or duty. So I wanted to. So, for example, I'll give you an example. So I'm divorced, and in turn, my parents were divorced, and I've always felt sort of so they were divorced. I tried hard not to be, but I became divorced, and always felt that sort of weight of failure and shame and guilt. And so I was going to read. I was coming up to the passage where Jesus talks about divorce and says, don't divorce. And so I was kind of dreading it, but it came up, and I went into contemplative prayer, and I imagined Jesus saying those words, and I just realized something I knew but never really realized was that Jesus wasn't condemning divorced women. Jesus was trying to protect them. Because of the economic situations of that day, and that those statements were not made in condemnation, but those statements were made in love. And once I realized that, then I realized that if Jesus could love divorced women, then if Jesus could love the Samaritan woman at the well, if I had been there, Jesus would have loved me. That's the kind of thing that changed, and that's one example of many that pivoted. The journey is still going on, but it sort of pivoted me in a different direction in terms of how I view God, how I relate to God. The other thing that was a takeaway is discernment. Tell me if I'm running over.
No, you're good. We're plenty of time.
Okay. So I'd gone in. I'd gone in with the idea I needed discernment, which I did. My contract was coming up to an end, and I didn't know what to do, where I was going to be, and what I was going to do after that. So that was sort of the topic of my discernment. And I was terrified, frankly. I was just terrified of what would happen at the end of my contract if I didn't have a job. I thought that my life had to be a certain way for me to be a success. And then the pandemic came, So the end of the spiritual exercises didn't bring any clarity. But since then, since my pivot and moving on, I've been learning more about discernment, learning to trust in God, who to lead and to speak, and then now without a job to cling to, I am so much more free, so much more hopeful about my future, so much more able to hear without sort of the desperate clinging to a job that was getting in the way of me being able to actually hear God. And then most fairly recently, I just asked God, because it's tough. So I just asked God, why am I unemployed? And the thought came, how would you know that you're more then you're more than just your job.
Mm. Yeah.
So
I think for a lot of people who have been through these exercises, one of the things that we learn to do, and you're expressing it very well, is we learn just to have conversations with Jesus again.
mhm,
And maybe this is something we did as children when we didn't know any better, so to speak, and then we forget to do it as adults, maybe.
mhm,
But that ability to not only place ourselves, we talk about the Ignatian imaginative prayer, the ability to put ourselves in these stories with Jesus, not only to be with him there, although that's a great big part of it, but the real important part is that encounter, right?
mhm.
So can you talk a little bit more about that encounter with Jesus and how you experienced it?
Uh,
You told me
I,
once about that parable of, yeah, I believe, but help my disbelief, or help me believe more. So
okay, so from the story of somebody's son was sick and dying, and Jesus heals him. Was it, the guy said, "I believe. Help me to believe."
mm,
So I've taken that and I made that decision to believe. It comes and goes sometimes, but every time it goes, I pull it back and uh, just keep on going. And as I live as I live this way, I am learning to believe in Jesus. And believing in is what the Gospels talk about, and not believing that. I
mm,
think a lot of Protestants, and I don't know, maybe Catholics do as well, they get hung up on, to believe that. Do you believe that the resurrection happened? Or do you believe that Jesus was divine, or something like that? And those are questions that are not unimportant, but when you believe in, it
mm,
just sort of pushes them off to the side, because believing in Jesus, believing in the resurrection is so much more than believing that. The
mm,
life in the Spirit is, being born from above. It's what I've discovered. I've been a Christian all my life. I've been a charismatic Christian. I've been a mainline Protestant theologian and all that. And life in the Spirit has happened. But this is what I rediscovered in a new way, and in a way that is, I even want to say, dependable. Uh, a dependable way of how to live in the Spirit.
yeah. Thank you for that. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section right there in Facebook. Let's move and talk a little bit about your continuing work with Bridges. You've been very instrumental in helping us think more broadly about how we can better, more effectively share these exercises with our brothers and sisters who are Protestant. And we, to be honest, we've almost always had non-Catholics who have been a part of Bridges and who have taken the exercises with us. But it's also a large percentage of people do come from that Catholic tradition. So you have been helping us think about that. And there's actually a project that you're involved with called the Christ Project Praise. And praise means Protestants adapting Ignatian spiritual exercises. So can you tell us a little bit about what that's all about and where we are in the project right now?
Yeah, so when I was going through the exercises, I was like, why don't Protestants know about this? Well, and so I wanted to, I'm thinking, I'm thinking, instantly I could think of, different kinds of people that would be interested in it. So I wanted to start a project to adapt it to a Protestant setting. And then out of that thought came a grant, an opportunity to get a grant, and so I got a grant to fund, to partially fund people of color, Protestant people of color, to go through it and hopefully become prayer companions, because you build the capacity to grow by building the prayer companions. And then most recently, it's a retreatant from this year and I are going to do an 18th annotation group in the Gathering here in St. Louis, our church, which is which is the kind of people I think would be quite interested in it.
And an 18th annotation, just to clarify for people, is kind of it's not the full-blown 19th annotation retreat, but it's also more than a taste, right? I mean, you envision this as a pretty lengthy experience of the exercises, but not with the one-on-one companioning and that you get through a program like ours. That's correct. So
correct.
Kind of an introduction to Ignatius thought and ways of praying and that sort of thing.
Now, we don't have the capacity to do the one-on-one prayer companioning, and so if they want one, we'll send them over to Bridges. So and now we have an online group. So I'm inviting any of you, if you're out of state or have a friend that is out of town or out of state that wants to do the spiritual exercises, send them over here, because we have an online group. Any one of you that has a friend that's a Protestant that wants to do the spiritual exercises, send them over here, and we can accommodate that as well.
Yeah.
A little plug.
That's right. So I got that on the screen there now. Our website is thebridgesfoundation.org. There's lots of information there, lots of ways to reach out and contact us. We have a number of what we call free information sessions coming up all summer long at 5 different sites in the greater St. Louis area, including on the east side in O'Fallon, Illinois, and an online site, as Sharon mentioned. So there's information sessions for each of those that you can sign up for, come and learn a little bit more, and meet us. So please think about doing that, or tell your friends if you've already done it. So let me begin to wrap up here with a final question, unless someone else contributes another one. But one of the things that we learn in the process of doing the spiritual exercises is this real. It's kind of, in some ways, it's at the center of everything we do when we do the exercises, and it's the idea of finding God in all things, and that means in the beautiful things of life and the graces and our great relationships, but it also means finding God in the course of other times that maybe aren't that are maybe a little more difficult. Can you talk a little bit about that and about the idea of grace becoming kind of real and specific?
Well, I think that a great example, a great way that it has been put, was something that you said, Steve, in one of our online presentations, which is you were quoting, and I don't know who it was you were quoting, that said that the Beatitudes is a geography and not a something else, but it's a geography. And basically it's that you're in the right place when you're poor, you're in the right place when you are hungry. And the Psalms also talk about the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And I realized that, and it was in my own experience too. I'd never ever been unemployed before in my whole life, and sort of feeling the presence of God holding you, and when you're going through something like that. But anyway, back to your illustration. The picture I got was that that's God is, all of us are like that. All of us are poor, hungry, and all that. And when that's uncovered, and God is there, and that when that's uncovered, we see God there. But then most of the time, we manage to just layer, stuff on top of that, so we don't see God, because we're too busy, going out and doing fun things, or even doing good things, necessarily. So, but I think realized for the first time the truth of the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit.
Thank you. All right. Well, that was a great 20 minutes of conversation. We really thank you. We'll be here again in a month and another week. So it's a little longer than a month this time, but we'll be back on Friday, July 23rd. I'll be talking with Christy Hicks 8, who is a campus minister. That's the word I was trying to say. She's a campus minister at St. Louis University, and she's also one of our prayer companions in the Bridges program. So we'll be talking with her in July, a little bit about her work with college students. Christy's also done some writing and presenting on feminine approaches to spirituality and what that means. We'll probably delve into that a little bit too. So, Sharon, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all again for joining us. And if you have any questions, please check us out on our website. And we'll see you next time. All right. Thank you then. Bye.